Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and every week, twice a week usually, I go over true mysterious stories that have taken place, and they always contain at least one miracle, usually more than one. So if that sounds interesting, listen along and we will get started. This story today is about a man named Bob. When Bob was young in the 3rd grade, he started playing football and he loved it. He actually excelled at it. His coaches loved him. His friends loved him. He was just a happy-go-lucky kid that just was passionate about football. 3 years past that, so Bob was about in 6th grade at this time. He had a little sister come along, and when she was born, she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. That's a condition that involves your lungs, and when his little sister was 8 years old, she ended up getting worse. The disease progressed, and unfortunately, his little sister passed away. Well, Bob's whole family fell apart after that. His parents started bickering, and they eventually split. His older brother actually got involved with drugs, unfortunately. When Bob was 12 years old, he even started to drink and dabble in that. Now, Bob still loved football. He still played great. And, it actually gave him a sense of purpose when there's so much turmoil was going on in his life with his sister passing and his parents splitting and his older brother on drugs. Football was just It helped him to relax, but it just gave him something passionate to focus on instead of all that other stuff happening. And as I said, he was excellent at it. But when it wasn't football season, things just fell apart. Bob filled a void with drugs and alcohol. And of course, it started with marijuana, then went to PCP, mescaline, and then eventually on to opiates. Not a good thing. That's what he chose to fill that void when he couldn't play football because it wasn't football season. Now, mind you, he was only 12 when he started to drink and experience all these drugs and all that. And he actually, in 8th grade, had an overdose. Didn't go into a whole lot of detail about that. Obviously, he made it through. But yeah, still scary at 8th grade. So sad. But this time, sophomore, 15 years old, he's just focusing on that weight program. He's doing it every day, and he's getting better and better. And in fact, on that New Year's Eve, when he was 15 years old, he had a conversation with his older brother, and he vowed that he was going to give up drugs completely. Well, his brother kind of laughed and chuckled and said, "Okay, yeah, sure, Bob. We'll see. We'll see if that happens," kind of thing. For 2 years, Bob stayed focused. He did great. He excelled at football still, and he was clean and sober. For 2 years, he was doing great. And when he was a senior, he was actually offered a full scholarship to Syracuse University. Once he got there, though, he began to struggle. You see, Bob was an offensive lineman, so he needed to gain weight. He really needed to be 250 pounds or more, and he was struggling. Anything he did, he just could not gain the weight he needed to. And, this thought was always in the back of his mind, like, if I can't do this, I will never make it to the pros. And that was his goal at this point in time. He wanted to make it to the pros, to the NFL. And to do that, he had to think of something. If he couldn't gain the weight, there's no way. During that time, Bob also struggled with his academic classes. He was failing. It was just a big mess. So he actually ended up getting an offer to Rhode Island, which would be closer to home and his friends, and I guess you could say more low-key than a big university like Syracuse. So he said, yes, I want to transfer. And he did. Once he got there, things were great for Bob. He was doing well. And he said, oh, yes, this is a way better fit. But he noticed something. Steroids were rampant there at that smaller college in Rhode Island. And because they were rampant, it was always on Bob's mind, like, I wonder if I could just try it. I wonder if it would help me gain the weight that I really need to be as an offensive lineman. As you can imagine, yes, Bob started taking steroids. He started gaining and gaining quick, and he started getting bigger in size and looking more buff. And he was happy. He was playing the best that he ever had in his life. And yes, he got up over the 250, maintained it. And he didn't really care about the side effects. That to Bob was like, I'm meeting my goals and I'm going to make it to the pros. That was always on Bob's mind. So he actually ended up making first team all conference his senior year. Shortly after, Bob started to get offers. He thought about going with the Dallas Cowboys, but he changed his mind and went with the Patriots instead. Once he got there, he was still on steroids at that time. And Bob, he had like a free agent and he was given a trial period. So, he just really had to make a good impression. So he was out there at every practice doing his best. He even, at one point had some kids at the end of one of his practices ask for his autograph, which that just, did wonders for his ego because he was like, oh, that's so cool. I can get used to this feeling. So he was very happy at this point. Since Bob was the strongest rookie out of all of them, he thought he had a pretty good chance of making it, like past the trial period. A little bit of time went by and Bob started to notice that he was just lagging a little bit. He was beginning to be a little bit slower than the rest of the other guys on the team. So that kind of worried him. And he was like, gosh, he just couldn't get over that hump. He used to be top. Now he's lagging behind the rest of the guys. Not only that, he ended up hurting his ankle pretty bad as well. So one day the coach called him into his office and it was pretty disappointing. He, basically told Bob, look, Bob, you're a great player. We really like you, but the team just doesn't have enough room for you. So he had to be let go. That devastated Bob. Unfortunately, that night he was so depressed and down in the dumps, he went to a bar and ended up getting plastered. He wanted something to numb that pain. And so, unfortunately, he reverted back to his old ways and decided to dabble in alcohol again. After that, Bob actually got called by the USFL team in Houston. And they flew him down for his tryouts. And they took him to a well-known and prestigious hospital, it said, and there the hospital actually gave him steroids. Crazy. That just blew my mind when I was reading it because I was like, what? A hospital? A prestigious one at that? Anyway, though, they gave him steroids and soon thereafter, he learned that the place there in Houston, it was even more rampant with steroids, way worse than where he came from. Well, Bob went to all the practices, and of course he was on steroids, and at the end of the day, when he'd go back to the hotel, they had parties, of course, they got drunk, they partied and went to nightclubs, and he said the nightclubs would let all the players in free, so, he was just having the time of his life, basically. But after doing that day after day and week, month after month, and so on, that would wear on anybody. And it started to wear on Bob. He began to think, I can't live like this forever. This kind of lifestyle is going to kill me. So there actually came a point in time when Bob started to pray. And he really hadn't done a whole lot of that before. But he did. Since he had never really done it before, he wasn't really sure, like, okay, what do I even say? How do I pray? So he just prayed for wisdom and strength. One night, after dinner and drinks, one of the players stood up and made an announcement. And the announcement was that there would be a Bible study starting, and it would be every Thursday night for whoever was interested. Well, the guy who stood up and announced it, he was highly respected, and he was actually the captain of the defense. So Bill thought to himself, wow, if he's announcing this and going to go to this, he's like, I'm very intrigued. Another day came, and, Bob was big and strong at this point in time and doing fairly well at all the practices and everything, but he just felt a big hole, emptiness inside of him. And, when he was feeling that, one day came along and he was called into the office of the coach again. But this was, of course, in Houston this time. Well, he was let go again, but this time it didn't sting as worse as the last. It almost like, I don't know if he was prepared for it or just down on himself anyway. So it didn't impact him like the last time. And one of his teacher friends actually got him a job as a teacher and coach at Bangor High School in Maine. So he flew up there and accepted the job position, and he really wanted to get off these darn steroids, but he knew that the withdrawals would be horrible, and with starting a new job, going through withdrawals, he was very nervous about that. Fast forward 7 months that go by, and Bob at this point has lost 60 pounds. He is weak, he's tired, he's frail feeling, and in addition to that, it was just really hard to deal with his anger, because that's a big time side effect with stopping steroids, extreme anger and rage outbursts. So he was having a tough time with that. So much so that one day a student kind of fat-talked Bob. Bob just flew off the handle and ended up shoving the kid across the room into a net divider. But luckily, or should I say blessing, he wasn't let go from that. And, today, oof, that'd be bad news. You'd probably be jailed and lose your job. But he kept his job. Fast forward a few years after that, and he meets and marries his wife, Stephanie. They also have 2 boys. There came a time where they wanted to go visit Bob's parents in Rhode Island, so they did. And on the way, Bob wanted to stop and talk to one of his old high school coaches by the name of Dennis O'Brien. Well, Dennis, unfortunately, had terminal heart disease, and he ended up telling Bob that the best thing that he could ever do was own a Bible and read it. He said to know it. You have to know that Bible, basically. And a little background on Dennis. Dennis actually used to be a very hard drinker, and at this point in time, Bob still was. He still was drinking pretty hard. Also, to note, at this point in his life, Bob was not using drugs anymore. It was just alcohol. And he was an alcoholic. And in 1989, Bob's older brother, he never could get it together either. And he passed away from an overdose. Well, this sent Bob into a tizzy and spiraled, and he just drank more and more, to deal with the pain and numb things. That was in 89. In 1990, Bob's dad died of leukemia. So these things just kept adding up, and Bob just kept getting worse with the drinking. Well, back to Dennis, when he was telling Bob his testimony, he ended up inviting him to a Bible study. At that time, Bob declined, but Dennis didn't stop. He kept inviting him over and over, and finally, Bob gave in and finally attended one. The one that he attended, they had been reading out of the book of Romans, and Bob sat there. He was thinking and listening and thinking deeply again. And just hearing all sorts of things, about how Jesus died on the cross for him. And Bob began to pray and ask for forgiveness that night. And no sooner after that night, Bob began to see a change in his life. And pretty quick, Bob had another passion in his life, and that was music. So that was good, to focus on music and whatnot. But also, keep in mind, he was still drinking. It's not like he had stopped drinking at this point. And at the beginning, before the change in him started, Bob was drinking a 6-pack a day and at least a bottle or 2 of whiskey per week. As time went on, a slow change began in Bob. And Bob was still going to the Bible studies. And one particular Bible study he attended during this time in his life, they were talking over Ephesians. And he thought deeply on that. And it just captured his attention. And for a while, Bob actually stopped drinking. He went on a hunting trip shortly thereafter. He was with his in-laws, and there would be a day that changed that. So he wasn't on alcohol at this point when he went on the trip, but he went on the trip again. And I guess his in-laws were out and about hunting. Maybe he was in camp. It didn't say exactly, but he was there alone and he noticed a bottle of gin and he thought on it. And unfortunately, Bob made the decision to drink it. He drank the entire bottle. Not only that, Bob took his own brother-in-law's vehicle while they weren't there to go to the liquor store to buy more. This does not look good, folks. Well, because he drank a whole bottle of gin and then who knows what he got at the liquor store and drank that. Because of that, he was in a stupor and he doesn't remember much else about that trip. But apparently, his in-laws told him that he ended up shooting off rounds of ammo randomly into the woods. Thank goodness it didn't hit anybody, because you can imagine if you're wasted and doing that. Once they got back, of course, his wife was livid. That's understandable. So they began to quarrel and fight. And, she even admitted to him that she had been angry and upset for quite some time now. So this wasn't all of a sudden. She had been angry and they had been bickering because of his drinking. And, he had stopped for a time again. But that trip just put him into a dizzy and he started again, unfortunately. Anyway, she told him she'd been angry for a while. She packed up the kids' stuff, took them, and left. So Bob was there to think over his actions. Bob, he just, after they left, he knew this was it. This was his rock bottom. He had no idea what to do. He even went and laid on one of his boys' bunk beds, and he was just, he was in a drunken stupor when he did that, and he was just feeling down on himself. As he was lying there on one of the bunk beds, he remembers hearing a voice, and it said, "This is what life is like without me." Well, that, set Bob off into tears. He wept and he sobbed and he cried out to God and he said, "God, I can't do this anymore." And he pled for help. He said, "God, please help me. I don't know what to do." He admitted to himself and to God as he was kind of speaking out to him. He said, "I can't stop drinking alcohol by myself. I can't do it." It was after that incident, you could say, when a miracle happened. And it started pretty much right after he started praying to God that night. After that night, wouldn't you believe it, Bob never had another drink again. Now, you may be thinking, oh, come on now. Well, that's Bob's story, and I'm going to believe him because while my miracle was nothing like that, it was very different, but I definitely had it. It was still one of those moments where you say, You can't be cured from multiple sclerosis. That's the silliest thing. Anyone could say that to me. In fact, I'm sure there's people that know me that think that. I don't know, but it happened. I'm here and I'm speaking to you with no cognitive functions that are, off the wall or in pain in bed. So it happened. So because of that, I believe that I believe that Bob really did not have another drink. I believe that miracle did happen and can happen. Most times, if you would have asked me over a year ago, I probably would have said, I would have been saying, no, he needs rehab or, extensive help. You can never just quit cold turkey, especially without withdrawals and all that. Well, he did, and it happened. That's the miracle aspect part of this story, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's amazing. And that was a little tangent of mine, but going back to the story, Bob now sees that all those years he was focused on physical strength and getting big and buff. He now knows, hey, physical strength, that wasn't the answer. The real strength can and only comes from the Lord himself. Now, also, there is this, though. Because of all those years that Bob took all those steroids, he now, of course, has problems with his joints. They're just in awful shape. The doctor basically told him that he had the knees of an 85-year-old. Like the cartilage is gone, so it's almost like bone on bone. Sounds so painful. So yeah, and when the doctor told him that, Bob was only 43 years old. So yeah, that really did a number on his joints. It also said, though, that Bob had a message to the younger generation. And he wants them to know to just trust the Lord and don't lean on your own strength and abilities. Just trust him. And he says, no matter how dark things may seem, that darkness, it will never extinguish the light. I loved that. I loved that he said that at the end. I agree, 100%. And I hope you guys liked this story. It was a different one than what they're usually about. Still just great to listen to and a great miracle at the end, of course. I hope you guys liked it. And if you did, remember to like and subscribe, please. And I will see you guys for the next one. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.